So all you surfers out there, or not surfers out there, I want to know, leave me a comment down below. If I put this thing on the back of my surfboard, sorry, this thing on the back of my surfboard with this thing on the back of it, does that make me a kook? Now, I would have answered yes with you a year or two ago, but things changed. But I'm going to talk about that at the end of the video. Right now, I'm going to tell you what this thing is. Now, this is a motorized fin. It's got a propeller on the back of it and a little remote control that you attach to your wrist. So when you are paddling out and you need a little assistance getting out to the lineup, you can turn it on and it'll putt along and help propel you. When you are paddling into a wave, it's got another paddle mode where you can hit it and it gives you a little boost on your way into the wave. It's also got paddleboard mode, so you could do like long, slow cruises with it, or if you're having to fight the wind, it can help out with that. Now you're probably asking yourself, why are you talking about this thing in the studio and not at the beach? Well, that's because this guy forgot to plug his microphones in. So this is what all that footage sounded like. Now, I have some really strong feelings about this thing in both directions, so you're going to want to stay tuned to the end of the video so I can go over all those. I'm also going to go over the pros and cons of this thing so you can decide if this is something you're interested in. Now, installing this fin on your board is pretty much like any other fin, except in this case, there's an adapter because they've got adapters for every different fin pocket type. If you want to check out what adapters they do have, I will have a link for this thing down below so you can check it out. Once you have the adapter in place, the fin itself pops onto the adapter and it's held in place with little set screws. Itself is actually located inside the fin and is turned on and off with a magnet that's on the strap of the little wrist piece that you wear. You can then pair it up to your Bluetooth, and this is where you can go through and change all the settings. It's got settings for both surfboards and paddle boards, and I guess you could use the paddleboard settings for a kayak as well, but you can then set up what each button does on the controller as well. So you kind of tune it to whatever you want, and you can also adjust how powerful each setting is so you can prolong your battery life if needed. Now, the day that we actually decided to drag the camera out, unfortunately the surf was ridiculously tiny. This is what SoCal surfing looks like in the summertime. Anyway, I went out with one of my lifelong friends, Eddie. I've been surfing with this guy for 30 plus years, and we just went out and messed around because, like I said, it was a pretty small day. What was kind of fun about this was I got to actually have Eddie surf the fin for a little bit, and Eddie has never surfed this fin before, so I've been surfing it for a while. Eddie, this is his first time out on it. And because this time out it was a smaller day, we actually spent a lot of time just kind of messing around with the settings on it, seeing how fast it could push us out without paddling, and just kind of goofing around having fun with it. With a day of embarrassingly small surf out of the way, let's move on to the paddleboards. I'm more of a diehard surfer and a paddleboarder by accident, but fun factor wise, I think I had more fun on the paddleboard with the motor than with the surfboard. So we stuck the fin on one of my bigger cruiser boards, and this thing's more geared towards flat water and harbors. So that's where we are. My daughter's in her kayak here filming, and I have the board, or the fin, in the stand-up paddleboard mode, which has some different modes than surfing. It has a long mode where you can have it run for a long time. You can also customize them as well, but I had a lot of fun on the paddleboard just kind of messing around. On our cruise back to where we put in at, we wanted to see actually what it could do as far as how much weight it could pull, so we attached my paddleboard to my daughter's kayak and pulled the thing all the way back to the beach under power. We weren't going very fast, probably 3 miles an hour or so, but we did make it, and that means it held me, I'm about 175 pounds, plus my daughter's kayak and her weight, so it can actually push a fair amount of weight. Now, before we get into the pros and cons, I do have to address the question I had at the beginning of the video, and also why I have this thing. And the question was, does this make me a kook? And I surfed for 30 years without this thing, and I surfed for 6 months with it. So I'm not exactly coming at this thing with no experience, but I am coming at this thing with a pretty bad injury. About 1.5 years ago, more like 2 years ago, downhill mountain bike crash. Long story short, arm completely out of commission, surgery, broken bones, messed up head, you name it. 1.5 years of PT, I could get my arm this high. So I couldn't paddle. When I finally got to the point where I could paddle, I went out and I got about 20 minutes in and I just gassed out, and my shoulder was just too sore to continue. So I threw this thing on the board, and my 20-minute surf session turned into a 2-hour surf session. And I got to go out and enjoy surfing again and have fun without being horrendously uncomfortable. So that's why I have this thing. So first we'll go over the pros. And the most significant pro, I think, is the question, is this thing fun? And yeah, it's fun. You saw in the video, I surfed this thing in all sorts of different conditions. I've had it on pretty big stuff, but the day I happened to bring the camera, the conditions were garbage. They were small waves, they were crumbly waves, they weren't really fun. And I was out with my buddy Eddie, and we both been surfing our whole lives together. And we were just out messing around, having a good time. And this thing was a lot of fun. He didn't even want to try it at first, and he finally got on the board. We were goofing around and spraying each other with it and messing around. We had just a good, fun time. But the other pro is what I just talked about, in that if you have somebody who has an injury that's holding them back from being able to get out and enjoy the sport, this might get them back in the water, and that's what I'm really grateful for. Now, just getting down to the design pros and things that I've seen people commenting about and asking about online. The first one is battery life. This thing will last me through a full 2-hour surf session and come with juice to spare. But that's because I'm only using it when I absolutely need it. So on the paddle out, if I have a long paddle out, I would power the thing up. And as I was getting a little bit gassed out on waves, I would use it to give me a little boost into the wave. So I was using it as an assist, not running it the whole time like a boat. Now on the paddleboard, I was also really surprised because we had it on and off and on and off. I did a lot of manual paddling, and then every now and then I'd kick the thing on. At the end of our jaunt around, you saw we actually tied our paddleboards together and sat down on them and let it pull us into the wind all the way back out of the harbor to where we had put in at, where we just kind of chit-chatted. And when I got back, I thought this thing would be stone dead. And it had 70% of the battery life in it. So the battery life actually was holding up pretty darn good. Other things I've seen people asking about that I want to address that turned out to kind of be non-issues that I was concerned about was, if you looked on the profile of this thing, it is wide. And I was concerned about the amount of drag this thing would put behind the board going through the water. And it really, you do notice it back there. You obviously notice it. It's much bigger and it's heavier than a fin. But it doesn't feel like you're dragging an anchor behind you. I can paddle this thing out and I can paddle it into waves with it turned off, no problem. And the other thing I've seen people ask about is the handling. How does this thing handle? Because it's big and heavy and weird. So on my longboard, it really doesn't affect the handling too much. It still turns and handles like a longboard should, which is kind of like a dump truck, but that's what I like. People have also asked about the weight, and yes, this thing is heavy. It is not a very lightweight fiberglass fin. It will throw the center of gravity off on your board a little bit, but it's not so bad. It's not manageable. You just need to know that it's back there, and I move myself forward on the board just a tad to make up for the weight hanging on the back of my board. Now, just something to be aware of, it's not really a pro or a con, but is the noise. This thing does make noise. It's not really noticeable when you're in the swell and the stuff's moving around you and you have this thing on. You'll hear it, the people next to you won't. So now we've addressed the pros and some of the questions that I keep seeing come up on social media when people are discussing these things. So now let's talk about the cons, because nothing's perfect and there are some little things that I ran into with this. The first thing I want to point out is the charging plug. The charging plug plugs into the back here, and it's just this little silicone plug connected with a little tiny little piece there. And I know me, and you're probably like me, I'm gonna break that thing, and I'm gonna lose that thing, and then I'm not gonna have a plug, and then I'm gonna be jamming wax or an ear plug or God knows what in there to seal that sucker up. We talked about battery life, and battery life was really good. The only bummer is you don't really have an easy way of checking the battery life. Right here on the side, there's a little light and it blinks in different colors depending on how much battery you have, which is great on a surfboard because you're in the water. You can flip it over and look. If you're on a paddleboard though, you're not gonna flip your paddleboard over because it means you gotta get off your board. And if I'm paddling, especially in flat water, I'm not coming off my board into the water. And I'm certainly not gonna do that with a kayak. And there's no way to check your battery life through this. Now you might think, hey, check it on your phone. I tried that. My phone wouldn't connect to it when it was in the water. The next thing, and I had mentioned it in the video, is this thing doesn't have any sensors on it. It doesn't know what's going on in the water. It's just a timer. So when you press and say, I'm paddling into a wave, it kicks on for the predetermined amount of time you've programmed, and that's what it does. So it'll keep going. If you spill, the board will keep going. It'll also keep going after you've already caught the wave, which can screw you up depending upon how big of a wave you're in, how steep the wave is. You might not want that extra push. So you do have to kind of know how this thing is going to run and anticipate it and know when you want to push the button. Now, if you do come off the board and the board tries to get away from you, you really should be wearing a leash with this thing because that would be bad. But but you can also just push either one of the buttons on these and it'll automatically shut down. The next con, if you're in an area with seagrass, this prop eats seagrass. As I've been shooting this video, little dried chunks of seagrass have been falling off the prop, and it loves to wrap itself around in here. It does have these little guards, so bigger stuff like giant kelp, I haven't had a problem with. I've plowed right through kelp, it hasn't sucked anything in or wrapped, but the finer seagrass, this thing just binds itself up. It does have a guard on the back of it that you can remove, but it's kind of hard to remove, especially in the water. So getting in there and pulling all the stuff out can be a pain. I debated running this thing without the guard, but I like my toes, and I have this bad feeling that this thing's gonna eat my toes. So I've been leaving the guard on there. So getting the seagrass out can be a pain. And the last con I want to address is the surf community itself. There is no community better at gatekeeping than surfing. If you showed up to a break, and I'm in like southern central California, so if you showed up to a place like C Street, County Line, Malibu, any of those places with this thing, you're gonna get laughed off the beach at best. It's not gonna be pretty. So you really have to think about where you're planning on using this thing. I can't really see you having a problem with a paddleboard. Surfers already don't like paddleboarders, so there's that, and I'm both, so I'm a walking contradiction here. Where I was surfing with this thing, because I'm trying to rehab and get back into shape and whatnot, I wasn't surfing at those beaches with this thing. I was surfing at kind of the more beginner beaches north of Ventura, so not a big deal up there. I did get some comments about it, nothing negative, but based on what we've been seeing online, I don't think the surfing community would take kind to you showing up at one of those breaks with this thing. And I am also a little bit concerned about people that might use something like this as an alternative to the skill set of being able to paddle and being able to paddle into a wave. And what I mean by that is if somebody throws this on their board and thinks, great, I don't have to paddle, I don't have to be in shape, I can just use this thing. That's not the case. One, it just isn't the case. It's not going to work that well in that regard. But if you get out and something happens and this thing has pushed you out into a break or a situation or a lineup that has passed your skill set, now you're in a dangerous situation. And that's not okay. The other thing is batteries die, things go bad, these things, you could lose it, and all of a sudden you're dead in the water, your motor doesn't work, and you've got to get into shore. So you need to be able to hold your own without this thing and then use it as an assist. Same applies with the paddleboard. You don't want to be using this thing and have it die, and now you can't paddle into the wind to get back to shore, and now you're getting blown all the way to Hawaii. So now for the big question I asked at the beginning of the video, does this thing make me a kook? Well, I surfed for 30 years without this fin, and I surfed for 6 months with it. So did I lose my surfer credential? Am I now a kook? I don't think so, but if you think so, guess what? I don't really care what you think. So there's that. So I hope you got something out of this video, and I hope if you are arguing down in the comment section about whether or not this makes you a kook or not, I hope you win. Unless you're arguing with me, and then I hope I win. Well, we'll figure it out. But anyway, if you like this video, give it a thumbs up, subscribe, leave me a comment down below if you have any questions about this thing, or if you just want to have an argument. It'll be a good time. Thanks for watching.